Today we'll be talking about data visualization best practices. But before we dive into the topic, just a little bit about myself. My name is Rebecca Pop. I'm the founder of Vizlogue, which is a data visualization and data storytelling lab. And what we do primarily is workshops on various topics related to data visualization and data storytelling, whether in person or virtually, like today. A little bit more about my background. I have over a decade at this point of experience working in primarily media and digital analytics, with data visualization always being at the core of my work. And I would say some years ago, at this point, 7, 8 years ago, there was kind of a turning point in my career where I realized that myself, my peers, almost everyone around me was visualizing data and attempting to tell stories with data in a very practical way, but without informed by actual education and knowledge. I would say we were making decisions more based on intuition and based on what others were doing as opposed to knowledge. So that was kind of an aha moment for me. And that's when I became, I would say, obsessed with data visualization and data storytelling. So I literally read every book I could get my hand on. I went to conferences, I started writing, I started learning various tools. And then more recently in 2020, I'm losing track of years, I founded my company, Vizlogue. So everything kind of took off, and my expertise in data visualization and data storytelling expanded from there. But before we dive into best practices, I do have a question, and you can just type on the chat a simple answer like yes or no. Do you think data visualization and data in general can improve lives? Yes or no? Or maybe you're not sure. That's fine. You can just type it on the chat. Okay, I see some yes. Both data and visualization can and should, yeah. Yes, for sure. I 100% agree. And when it comes to data and data visualization improving lives, one of the figures that comes to my mind is W.E.B. Du Bois. And I don't know if you've heard of him in the past, but he was an American sociologist, historian, Pan-Africanist, civil rights activist, and he was actually the first African American to get a PhD degree from Harvard University back in 1895, a long time ago. And what's special about W.E.B. Du Bois is that him and his teams of students and researchers at Harvard, of course, did a lot of research, but then they really spent the time thinking about how they would communicate that research to the larger group. And in doing so, they created stunning charts, especially when you think that this was in the late 1800s or early 1900s. And the charts that they created weren't, using software. It wasn't as easy as it is today. It was literally done on paper. So a lot of calculation and estimation and measurement, and of course, very, very large sizes as well. And as you see, also very vibrant colors. And I'll show you 2 examples in a second, but before I do so, one more thing I'll mention is the fact that, again, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, W.E.B. Du Bois and his team of students and researchers even innovated when it comes to chart types. Something that we tend to do today, but it's stunning to think that it was done so long ago as well. So I'll show you 2 of his charts. The first one here is very unique. It's the Du Bois spiral. And basically here we are looking at assets and the value of assets that are household and kitchen furniture that were owned by the Black population in Georgia, ranging from 1875 all the way to 1889. And of course, you can see how over the years, the size of the spiral increases to the point where it goes around more than once. So clearly there's an indication that the value of assets owned by the Georgia African-American population has increased over time. And also that implies that their net worth is increasing over time. So this is one chart that's one very unique. You rarely see it today, if at all. It's definitely not common, but it's mind-blowing to think that it was invented so many years ago. And it was done in such a physical way, but also done to raise awareness, right? And to change lives, to improve the lives of the African-American population in Georgia specifically, so others are aware of the fact that they are increasing in the socioeconomic status. And then the second one that I'll show you is probably more familiar to you. It's a bubble chart, but again, what stands out is the colors, which are very, very vibrant. And here we are looking at the teachers in Georgia and how the number of teachers in public schools have increased over time, ranging from 2,512 all the way to 3,316. And of course, the size of the bubble indicates that change over time. Again, a very minimalistic approach to data visualization, but very impactful and a story that's very easy to convey, and that really talks about how the socioeconomic but also the professional status of the population, the African-American population in Georgia, is improving, and they're making more of an impact in public schools. And there's more to W.E.B. Du Bois. I do want to share on the YouTube channel. There's actually an interview that I have about W.E.B. Du Bois with an expert in data visualization who is highly specialized in W.E.B. Du Bois' work. So if you're interested to learn more about W.E.B. Du Bois and his work and his chart types, I highly encourage you to give it a listen. I think his work is absolutely fascinating. But then we'll switch gears. I just wanted to kind of show you that best practices in data visualization and data visualization being used to change lives is something that has been done for a long time. It's not a new concept. When it comes to data visualization best practices, of course, there is a lot one can cover. Today, we'll be focusing specifically on 3 topics: storytelling, decluttering, and creativity. And then towards the end, we'll have a short but hopefully fun exercise. So starting off with storytelling, I would say storytelling is almost like a buzzword. So many people use it, and it's something that many of us want to leverage, but sometimes it's just hard to really apply it. To me, if I were to ask myself what is storytelling in very simple terms, I would say from my perspective, one is one's ability to really dive into the main insight or main insights, and then also related to that, one's ability to convey that insight or those insights to the audience in a way that's not only relevant to the audience, but also engaging. So when it comes to storytelling, what I always encourage training participants, students to do is to pause every single time you create a chart, a dashboard, a presentation that includes graphs. Really think, are you telling a story? But not only are you telling a story, but are you telling a story that's relevant and engaging to your given audience. And as you are trying to answer this question, I would encourage you to consider the medium. And I think this is not something we talk about a lot when it comes to data storytelling, but it is really important because depending on how, as in what medium you use to present your data story, you need to make adjustments. So specifically, the dichotomy between static and dynamic. As in, are you maybe sending out a report, you're not there to present it, it's static, or will it be, I don't know, a graph part of a blog post, for example, or a social media post, or reversely, maybe you are giving a presentation and you are there to fill in with context and additional information. So starting off with static, what's important is that your visualization has to be all-encompassing. As in, without you being there, you have to think whether the data storytelling comes across, whether everyone, ideally in your audience, will be able to get to the data story that you're trying to convey. And if they have additional questions that are likely to come up, those are somehow embedded within the visualization if there is a need for an annotation, for example, or a footnote that explains an abbreviation or an acronym. And I'll show you two examples. The first one here, looking at the density chart, specifically at the Olympic male athlete's weight. And first of all, the chart type is pretty engaging. It's a relatively newer chart type, almost like an area chart that several area charts that overlap, right? And you have a few different categories here of sports such as gymnastics and cycling, rowing, fencing, so on and so forth. And because of the color coding, but also because of the chart type, the storytelling is pretty straightforward and pretty easy to understand in a static manner. You clearly see that the weight tends to be more elongated, as in you have more athletes, male athletes with higher weight in handball, for example, while the peak in gymnastics, it's at a much lower weight, same for triathlons. So again, color mixed with the chart type. Also, we don't have a ton of categories on the chart, makes the story comes across pretty easily. Now, if you're presenting data in a static manner, and you have an area chart or a trend line, in this case here, I'm looking at the Tesla stock price from 2017 all the way through March 17, 2025. And here, when you see any data, whether that's the Tesla stock price or anything else that has a lot of ups and downs, dips, increases, most likely your audience will start wondering, right? What caused those dips? What caused those increases? So if you are not there to present the data live, if you are sharing the chart in a static manner in the form of a report or again in a blog post, maybe in a LinkedIn post, you have to think about how you could add additional context. And in this case, that additional context could come in the form of annotations. So here, for example, you see an annotation where there was a spike, there was a stock sale by Elon Musk. Then there was another increase later on in 2023 when 5 million cars were produced. And then you see also an annotation for when Trump won the election. So those annotations really help provide context in the absence of you being there and presenting. Now, when it comes to dynamic presentations or dynamic data storytelling, since you are there presenting the chart, you have to think about what you could potentially remove from the chart, like annotations, for example, because you are there to fill in some of the context. Also, you have to think about elements like synchrony, like how does what you are showing in a chart align with what you are saying verbally? Because you don't want to lose your audience as you are presenting something. Maybe they're looking at a different chart type if you have several chart types displayed, for example. Or maybe they are trying to figure out an abbreviation that you're not explaining, or what the axes mean if you're not taking the time to explain them. So instead of me going through the different elements, I thought it would be best to show you the first few minutes of a video. It's a TED presentation by Hans Rosling. And if you haven't heard of him, I highly encourage you to look him up. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but he was one of the best data storytellers that's ever been around. When he passed away, major publications like the New York Times, Washington Post, wrote articles mentioning his data storytelling skills, which were very unique in the sense that he took publicly available data sets, like the one you see in the video short clip from the UN, and made them very accessible, not just in the way he created the charts, but also in the way he presented the charts. So I'll just play the first few minutes. I'll ask you to pay close attention to what ingredients you notice as he's presenting. What tools is he using to pull you in, to make the presentation engaging and accessible and relevant.
About 10 years ago, I took on the task to teach global development to Swedish undergraduate students. That was after having spent about 20 years together with African institutions studying hunger in Africa. So I was sort of expected to know a little about the world. And I started in our medical university, Karolinska Institute, an undergraduate course called Global Health.
Wow, looks like the website is having some errors. All right, 1 second.
The biggest mistake I see when people are applying for their dream job, not realizing that pretty much anyone can write a good resume. You need to focus on the things that are actually going to make you stand out. Let me show you how. To do this, you need to make sure you have Grammarly installed. It's going to serve as your AI writing partner. So the next
to promote family planning, and they About 10 years ago, I took on the task to teach global development to Swedish undergraduate students. That was after having spent about 20 years together with African institutions studying hunger in Africa. So I was sort of expected to know a little about the world. And I started in our medical university, Karolinska Institute, an undergraduate course called Global Health. But when you get that opportunity, you get a little nervous. I thought, these students coming to us actually have the highest grade you can get in Swedish college system. So I thought maybe they know everything I'm going to teach them about. So I did a pre-test when they came. And one of the questions from which I learned a lot was this one: which country has the highest child mortality of these 5 pairs? And I put them together so that in each pair of country, one has twice the child mortality of the other. And this means that it's much bigger the difference than the uncertainty of the data. I won't put you at a test here, but it's Turkey, which is highest there, Poland, Russia, Pakistan, and South Africa. And these were the results of the Swedish students. I did it, so I got a confidence interval, which was pretty narrow, and I got happy, of course. I had 1.8 right answer out of 5 possible. That means that there was a place for a professor of international health and for my course. But one late night, when I was compiling the report, I really realized my discovery. I have shown that Swedish top students know statistically significantly less about the world than the chimpanzees. Because the chimpanzee would score half right. If I gave them 2 bananas with Sri Lanka and Turkey, they would be right half of the cases. But the students are not there. The problem for me was not ignorance, it was preconceived ideas. I did also an unethical study of the professors of the Karolinska Institute that hands out the Nobel Prize in medicine, and they are on par with the chimpanzee there. So this is where I realized that there was really a need to communicate, because the data of what's happening in the world and the child health of every country is very well aware. So we did this software which displays it like this. Every bubble here is a country. This country over here is, this is China. This is India. The size of the bubble is the population. And on this axis here, I put fertility rate. Because my students, what they said when they looked upon the world, and I asked them, what do you really think about the world? Huh? Well, I first discovered that the textbook was Tintin mainly. And they said the world is still we and them. And we is Western world, and them is third world. And what do you mean with Western world? I said, well, that's long life in small family, and third world is short life in large family. So this is what I could display here. I put fertility rate here, number of children per woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about 8 children per woman. We have very good data since 1960 about, on the size of families in all countries. The error margin is narrow. Here I put life expectancy at birth, from 30 years in some countries up to about 70 years. And 1962, there was really a group of countries here that was industrialized countries, and they had small families and long lives. And these were the developing countries. They had large families and they had relatively short lives. Now, what has happened since 1962? We want to see the change. Are the students right? It's still 2 types of countries? Or have these developing countries got smaller families and they live here? Or have they got longer lives and live up there? Let's see. We start the world. And this is all UN statistic that has been available. Here we go. Can you see there? It's China. They're moving against better health. They're improving there. All the green Latin American countries, they are moving towards smaller families. The yellow ones here are the Arabic countries, and they get larger families, but longer lives, but not larger families. The Africans are the green down here. They still remain here. This is India. Indonesia is moving on pretty fast. And in the 80s here, you have Bangladesh still among the African countries there. But now Bangladesh, it's a miracle that happens in the 80s. The imams start to promote family planning, and they move up into that corner. And in 90s, we have the terrible HIV epidemic that takes down the life expectancy of the African countries, and all the rest of the world moves up into the corner where we have long lives and small family, and we have a completely new world.
So that's just the first few minutes of the video. Of course, I encourage you to watch the entire TED speech if you're interested. It's really fascinating. But I'll just ask you, and you can just type it on the chat, what data storytelling elements did you notice that make the presentation relevant and engaging and accessible, that really pull you in early on into the presentation to make you interested and really open to learning more? You can just type it on the chat. I'll take a look. We'll give everyone a second. Again, the question is, what data storytelling elements did you notice that really stood out and that really kind of pulled you into the presentation? Just give everyone a few more seconds to see. Rosling's personality, yes, he's very bubbly, right? He has a big personality and he really stands out. Also, he used humor right at the beginning. It's of course, a very serious topic, but by using humor, it made it a little bit more accessible, a little bit easier to digest. Also, I will point out how he was personally moving with the data. I'm not saying you always have to do so, but that's an option. I think many times when we present data, we are, static. Of course, on Zoom, you have to not move a lot, but when you do it in person, a little bit of movement can help to make the presentation a bit more dynamic. I will also point out to how he introduced the chart. As in, before diving into the results, he really took the time to explain what the x-axis and the y-axis represented and how the data was encoded, as in what the size of the bubble meant, what the colors meant. Those are all important elements that sometimes when we create the charts, of course, the charts are so straightforward to us, that sometimes we forget to take that step back and ensure that your audience, one, understands, but also you don't lose your audience's attention by talking about the insights while your audience is still at the stage of visually trying to understand what the data shows and how the data is encoded. So having that synchrony between what you're saying and what you're showing is very, very important. And then, of course, the bubble charts, the fact that they are dynamic, they are very engaging in themselves, right? The chart type becomes very, very engaging. So hopefully these are some data storytelling elements, dynamic data storytelling elements that you can apply to your work as well. So I would say when it comes to data storytelling, to dynamic data storytelling, as well as to static data storytelling, you really have to think about words and tone both. When it comes to words in a static version, annotations can become very important. Action verbs can help to make your presentation or your static visual a bit more dynamic. Adjectives sometimes if you have to describe. And overall, I would say keeping the language concise and simple. And you've seen that in Austin's presentation as well. Of course, he could have, introduced statistical terms, and he could have used a much more complex language that probably would have been more representative of the data. However, he kept the language simple and concise in order to make it accessible. And then particularly when you present, your tone becomes a key component. As in, do you speed up your speech or do you slow down, right? The attention is very different based on your speed of speech. Or do you pause, right? When you pause, your audience will pause as well. So when it comes to data storytelling, I would say there are three elements to keep in mind. One, if you present dynamically, synchronizing your speech, your presentation, verbal presentation with the visual, with what you're showing in the charts is really essential to make sure you're not losing your audience's attention. Annotations are key when it comes to static data visualizations to ensure your audience has sufficient context. And then finally, word choices, tone, I would say often overlooked or just considered right at the end, really play an essential role and should not be minimized. So that was storytelling. Next, we'll talk about decluttering. And this is one of my favorite topics because I think many times we just present the charts as as the templates have them, without really thinking about if there are elements we can remove or elements that we can add, design elements to highlight information. And if a graph is cluttered, it's hard to get to the insight. It's almost like you walk into the room and you're looking for, I don't know, your favorite pair of pants, but then you have 10 pairs on top of each other. And it takes you 5 minutes to find it, as opposed to maybe having them orderly and organized, and then you find it in a few seconds. It's kind of the same with charts. If you have a lot of information, if your chart is cluttered, redundant, the information is just harder to convey. So when it comes to decluttering, every time you create a graph, I encourage you to pause before sending it out and asking yourself 2 key questions. 1, is there redundancy in your graph? And 2, is your visual potentially overcomplicated? And of course, if your answer is yes to any of these 2, then you should take steps to overcome redundancy or the level of complication. And what you would need to do in that case is, 1, to strip down your chart of any elements that you think are really not helpful in conveying the message, in the sense that they don't add any value, and then build up a scene. Use elements to highlight your key message. And I'll show you in the next few slides a chart that I just found out in the wild that has redundancies and is overcomplicated in the way the story is being told. And then I'll show you step by step how I removed one design element at a time to make the graph cleaner and clearer. So this is the graph. It's a very simple bar chart, looking at the percentage of millennials who consume stories across Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook. And the graph has many unnecessary elements. I'll show you one by one what I did. So first, the grid lines. Those vertical lines are unnecessary because, 1, you already have the labels on the bars, and then 2, they're also very prominent. They take away attention from the numbers, from the bars. So by simply removing the grid lines, your chart already becomes much cleaner and much clearer. Next, I omitted the axes altogether. Actually, having the axis and the labels makes the chart, and that's something you should avoid as much as possible. You don't want your audience to be given the same information twice, right? And then making the axis horizontal. So as you can see, Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook in the original graph are written vertical. By default, vertical text is very hard to read. And you should make your audience's work as easy as possible. And if that means having text that's easy to read and horizontal, then that's what you should do as much as possible. Next, the thick border. There's this line, the thick border, black border, right next to the chart, vertically. It doesn't really add value. It actually takes away a bit of attention because it's black, which stands out quite a lot in the graph, and it's a relatively thick line as well. So simply by removing that border or thick line, the attention goes more to the data points and to the graph itself. And the next, color. So what we've done so far is stripping down, removing elements that are unnecessary, clutter, redundancy. Next is how you build up, how you highlight the story. And if the story, for example, is that Instagram had the largest percentage of millennials who consume stories on the platform, then you could potentially use a different color to highlight Instagram versus Snapchat and Facebook. And then, of course, ideally, you would want that highlight to be conveyed in the headline as well. You want to make the headline as insightful, concise, simple as possible. So in this case, you could say something along the lines of almost 7 in 10 millennials consume stories on Instagram. And then what was before the title of the chart could be the subtitle to ensure you still provide enough context and information, which is the percentage of millennials who consume stories on each platform. So by decluttering, removing redundancies, making the graph simpler, while also building up, as in highlighting the story through color in this case, through an insightful headline, you really go from the graph that you had before to the after, which is much more engaging and relevant. So when it comes to decluttering, the lesson here is really less is more. As in try to have the fewest elements possible to tell your story, and to avoid overcomplicating your data story, overcomplicating your graph, or redundancies in general. So that was decluttering. The third concept I want to cover today, and the last one, is creativity. Now, when we think about creativity, of course, that can take a ton of different shapes and forms. For our purposes today, specifically, I want to address creativity from the perspective of chart types. And I really want you to pause when you create graphs and to ask yourself, are you just defaulting to familiar chart types? And if the answer is yes, you might want to consider other options. I'm not saying you should or you have to, but you might want to. In the sense that sometimes a regular common chart type might be your perfect choice. However, if you're just defaulting to those common chart types because of lack of time, or maybe skills to create more advanced chart types, that's where I really encourage you to explore further. So I encourage you, in other words, to challenge yourself a little bit and to think about what's there outside the more commonly used chart types. And I would say 2 of the most commonly used chart types are, of course, the bar chart and the trend line. You see them everywhere. We've probably created them 100 times, and they do have the benefit that the audience finds them easy to read, understand, because they've been exposed to these charts time and time again. However, there are alternatives that you could consider. And of course, there are many chart types that go beyond the common ones, such as bar charts or trend lines. I'll just show you two examples in this case. So if you have, for example, a dual bar chart, like we have here, looking at poverty rate in 2016 across a few different countries, such as Denmark, Finland, Norway, France, so on and so forth. And then you have 2 colors, after tax and transfers in red, and before taxes and transfers in blue. So looking at the dual bar chart, in theory it works, right? There is no miscoding between the chart type and the data type, for example. However, if I were to ask 5 individuals what the story is, I might get 5 different answers. So maybe one person would tell me that France stands out because they have the highest percentage before taxes and transfers. Maybe another person would tell me that I don't know, Korea stands out because the 2 after and before taxes and transfers are closer together. Or maybe Denmark for some reason. So the story is not clearly highlighted. Now, just by changing the chart type without, making any additional adjustments when it comes to highlighting the story, And if we were to use, for example, a dumbbell chart like this one, or a dot chart, since we have 3 dots, you can see, in this case, we also have the total. So we have the third element here. You can see how Korea stands out right away, just because of the length of the line. All other lines are closer together and the dots are closer together. So you increase the likelihood that if your audience looks, or when your audience looks at the chart, their eyes are most likely going to Korea first. So Korea stands out more. Of course, talking about storytelling and building up the story, you could use additional elements to highlight Korea, such as colors, annotations, if it's presented in a static manner, or enclosure. But simply by changing the chart type, you can make progress in that direction. So here you have the before and after, the before with the dual bar chart, and the after with the alternative, which is, I would say, a more advanced graph. And then the second example that I want to show you is about maps. So the most commonly used map type is this one, is a corporate map, basically filled in color. So here, for example, we have the map of the United States, and you have color coding for each US state. Now, the challenge is that each state's size is kept proportional to its regular real life size. So what you run into is states that are very large in size and states that are very small. So for example, you have states on the east coast of the United States, such as New Hampshire, for example, or Rhode Island, which are very, very small. So it's hard to see the data, if you can see it at all. In the case of Rhode Island, it's not even labeled on the map because it's so tiny, it's hard to see it. And then you also run into another issue with large states, which kind of take over the story. So Texas, for example, California, very large states that take out a lot of the space on the map. So especially if your story is about the smaller states and something that happened, increase, decrease, stands out in the smaller states, the larger states would kind of take up the story, and it would be very, very hard for you to highlight the smaller states. So an alternative to the corporate map is what's called the hex bin map. And it could be any other shape. In this case, it's a hexagon. Of course, it could be a square, a star, any other shape. But the idea is to keep the location of each US state, in this case, consistent to its actual position, geographic position. However, the size of each state becomes the same. So by doing that, you don't run into the issue of not being able to highlight a smaller state, or into the issue of the larger states kind of taking over the story because of its sheer size. So in this case, for example, you see states like Rhode Island and Connecticut and New Hampshire on the West Coast actually visible and readable. So if your story is there, you can actually tell it. And this is an example, again, of a chart, the one that I showed you before, that's a choropleth map versus the hex bin map. So really what I encourage you to do when it comes to chart types is to explore less commonly used chart types. Again, that doesn't mean always use those less commonly known or less commonly used chart types. It means exploring to see if they are a good fit. They might not be a good fit. Maybe a bar chart is the best fit in some cases. But just by exploring, you can open up to alternatives, and you can understand if you have potentially better options. So next we have a short poll question, and then we'll do a short exercise as well. And we will launch the poll question in a second. You should see it on your end. The question is, which of the following 3 best practice concepts, which we just covered, is the hardest to implement for you? Storytelling, decluttering, or creativity? So if you were to pick one, which one would you say is the hardest to actually do in practice? We'll keep the poll up for a few seconds. I cannot see the results. I'm not sure if they will be displayed shortly. Okay, I can see them now. So let's see, most of you said both storytelling and creativity. So equally hard to implement, and decluttering seems to be easier to implement. Makes sense. I think decluttering is a little bit more straightforward. There are harder rules that you can follow. With storytelling and creativity, I think it becomes more art and science, which makes it a little bit harder to get a handle on. So I think that makes total sense, and I would expect you to say that. All right, for our next section and the last section of today's session, I'll invite you to do a short exercise, 5 minutes, no more. And it's just a sketching exercise, very low key when it comes to tools. So here you have a graph from the BBC. It's a dual bar chart looking at common disorders, mental disorders by gender, men and women, men in green, women in purple, compared across different age groups. So my question to you is to take a piece of paper and a pencil to sketch, or use something like paint on your laptop. Just a very rough sketch of how you could re-envision the chart. Maybe a different chart type, talking about creativity. Maybe how you could highlight the story in a static manner. Or maybe how you could declutter more and build up the story. So how would you change the chart to apply basically the elements that we talked about today: storytelling, decluttering, and creativity? I'll give you 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'll show you what I had in mind, and then if anyone wants to share as well, that would be great. So 4 or 5 minutes. And if you have questions, just let me know in the chat. 2 more minutes. Right, 1 more minute, and then if you do want to, I will give you the opportunity to show your sketch. All right. Well, hopefully you had the chance to sketch your re-envisioned chart, whether that was on paper or in a tool on your laptop, like Paint, for example. So I'll open it up to all of you, and I'll just ask if anyone wants to share their screen with their sketch. Give you a few seconds to see if we have anyone eager to share. Right, I don't see anyone on the chat who's eager, so I will show you my version and then you can change your mind. And if you do want to showcase your version, that's fine. So the way I envisioned the graph, it's just a very rough sketch, is potentially having a sum at the top across the two gender, women and men, potentially a bubble chart that shows the percentage across the two, and then at the bottom still keeping the age groups. But having a dumbbell chart, and then of course the distance between the two dots of the dumbbell and the line connecting them would really help highlight the difference between genders on the age groups where there is the largest difference. So a different chart type, also 2 charts in this case. And also adding annotations to highlight the message in a static format. So that's how I would have recreated the chart. That's my sketch. All right, well, that wraps it up for today. I will stop sharing my screen. We do have about 2 minutes left. So if there are any questions, please type them on the chat. As you do that, if you have questions, I will summarize. Today, we talked about data visualization best practices. Of course, there are tons of topics one could cover, but specifically, we dove into storytelling, decluttering, and also creativity, specifically when it comes to going beyond your typical chart choices and considering alternatives of more unique, more advanced graphics. As a parenthesis, decluttering is one of my favorite activities when it comes to data visualization. It really helps you be creative and also iterate, really get to the best chart type version that you could create. Right, well, it looks like there are no questions on the chat. So with that, I think we can conclude today's session. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And hopefully you get to apply the learnings right away.